This is Between the Brackets, a MediaWiki podcast, episode 59, April 28th, 2020. Welcome to Between the Brackets. I'm Yaron Koren, and my guest for this episode is Duncan Crane, who's a risk advisor for the United Kingdom's Financial Conduct Authority. He's also a MediaWiki user and administrator, and he's the main author of the TinyMCE extension, which does WYSIWYG editing. Duncan, welcome to the program.
Welcome, Yaron. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Great. Where are you located?
I'm currently sitting just outside London in a place called COBOL. In my front room, or my back room probably. It's sort of looking over the garden.
Yeah. So this is the first interview I've done since the more or less global lockdown started. The last episode was just a digest episode, and the one before that with Evita Hollis was recorded all the way back in early March. So I have to ask you, how are you doing with the lockdown?
Yeah, well, for me, it's not been too bad because I've worked from home quite a lot anyway. I think for me that the sort of big change has been that my wife is a teacher and my daughter is an educational psychologist and now working at home as well. So it's really a sort of competition for space and for quiet to get on with work. And but equally, it's quite a pleasure to spend more time with them as well. So.
Yeah, that's great. And sometimes a competition for bandwidth too.
Yes, yeah. As you know, we've been banned from using the video on this call because my wife's teaching a lesson at the moment, and she has to do that with video because it involves a lot of gestures. She's reading a story to 6 and 7-year-olds at the moment. So
oh, very nice.
It's quite nice to watch it. In fact, now the kids are sort of dialing in from their homes. She often gets the parents sitting there and watching her stories as well, which she says is a bit nerve-wracking.
I don't know. Kids tend to be harsher judges, I think, than parents are. I'm not sure.
Yeah, although she says as a teacher it's great because normally you're just there on your own. So if you mess up something, nobody else really knows about it.
I see.
Apart from the kids, and they don't really know what messing up is. But yesterday she was having some problems with the software, and like all the parents and kids, she could hear them laughing, but she couldn't see them.
Have you picked up any hobbies since all the social distancing started? You know, baking or that kind of thing?
Well, I do a lot of cooking anyway, but it has given me an opportunity to spend more time working on my TinyMCE extension, which I spend quite a lot of time on anyway. But when there's not much going on, I can sit here and just do some coding on that, which is really my hobby rather than my job. So
yeah,
but
yeah, go ahead.
I was speaking to my brother earlier on today, and he was saying he hasn't been out of his property for 3 weeks now, and I was saying, I haven't actually stepped out of my property for at least a week, or off my property. So it is quite different.
Yeah. You should. I hope you're at least going outside. That's important to anyone listening. If you care at all about my opinion. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. So I'm lucky to have quite a nice garden, and the weather's been fantastic for the last few weeks. So it's nice. I can go for a stroll in the garden and get some exercise.
Very good. What was I going to say? I don't remember. I was gonna say it seems like MediaWiki development. The maybe I'm imagining it, but it seems like the pace has picked up a little. I'm noticing more patches that other people are sending into my code and that kind of thing than before.
Yes. Yeah, it's sort of interesting. I mean, I started dabbling with MediaWiki probably 12 years ago, and I found it quite difficult to start with. Because I hadn't coded for years before that, but the documentation seemed quite patchy, and the code seemed quite impenetrable. In fact, it was a book of yours that really got me over the sort of initial learning curve to get into it. But I've noticed more recently they seem to be getting better at sort of maintaining the code and sort of documenting it. So maybe that's attracting more people to get involved. I don't know if you see that.
I don't know. Hard to tell. I'm just talking about in the last month or so.
Oh, right. So you think this is lockdown? People are starting to do a few more things.
Yeah, I guess it seems like some people are really. I mean, it's great. I'm certainly not trying to dissuade anyone. But yeah, it seems like some people, for lack of a better option, are just doing more development and maintenance work. Yes,
yeah, that wouldn't surprise me because. A lot of people, I think, are finding it difficult to get into their offices, or certainly over here, a lot of offices are sort of reduced greatly their workload. So.
Yeah. So let's talk about other stuff. Hopefully more positive. What's your background? What were you doing before your current job?
So before my current job, before that I was freelance. So I was doing mainly project management, big change projects, largely in the financial sector. So sort of things like new regulation or mergers and acquisitions or things like that, product launches. And I did that for about 10 years. And then before that, I was working for one of the big consultancy companies, a company called KPMG, again, doing sort of project management. And I probably did that for about 20 years. But a long, long time ago, before all of that, I did a bit of programming, which is where I sort of got my initial sort of joy of doing programming, funnily enough.
Yeah.
If you don't have to do it for a living, it can be quite good fun.
I think it's fun for a living too. I know what you mean, but it depends a lot on the job and that kind of thing.
It's nice to have the freedom to do the coding you want to do rather than... When I was coding, I used to write invoicing programs for companies. And once I'd done 5 or 6 invoicing programs, it got really, really tedious because I could just write them in my sleep, and I really didn't want to ever write another invoicing program in my life. So, but it's quite nice if you've got the freedom to do the bits you want to do.
Yeah. That reminds me, there's apparently now a major need in the United States, maybe other places, for COBOL programmers to handle all the government type of maintaining 50 or 60-year-old government software.
So there might be a role for me there. I might be able to earn some money at this. But
were you working with COBOL?
I used to joke when I was programming. I used to joke to people. They'd say, "Tell us an interesting fact about yourself," and I'd say, "Well, I speak at least 20 languages fluently." And they'd say, "Oh, that's amazing. So which ones do you speak?" And I'd say, like, COBOL, Fortran, Smalltalk, Assembler. So and then they get the joke that none of them were human languages because I'm very bad at speaking any languages, but my own, hopefully. But yes, I remember it was the year 2000. Even then, there were lots of ancient sort of coders coming out of the woodwork, out of retirement, with sort of long straggly beards and long hair and sort of really thick glasses, and they were loving it because it was all the code they produced years and years ago. And of course, nobody ever documented anything, so really they were the only people who could deal with the problem.
Yeah. Okay. Job security.
I think it's similar now. Yeah. So certainly, a lot of the projects I work with at the FCA, they have a sort of programming component, and it's amazing how little documentation tends to get produced. Whether that's just the people we use, but they always say, well, at the end of the project, we'll sort of document it, and then they all disappear about a month before the end of the project to other projects, and there's nobody left to write any documentation.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I don't know what factors into that. There's always a perverse incentive to not document one's software.
Yeah.
But so that you become indispensable, but that's just incompetence, really.
Yes, yeah, that's right. I suspect it's probably more sort of boredom by the time people get to the end of a long coding project.
Right? They
just want to move on to something else. Don't want to pore over the code and work out what it actually does.
Yeah. So you work now, as you mentioned, at the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority. What do you do there?
So they have a lot of quite large projects. You can imagine every time a bit of new regulation comes into force, it takes years to develop the regulation and the rules and consult about it. And then once they've done that, then they have to introduce systems that allow them to collect data and analyze it and report on it. And also they have to work a lot with industry, because industry also has to make a lot of changes to their software and their procedures to implement the new regulation. So and at any time, there's probably sort of 20 or 30 quite large projects and programs going on, sort of 50, 60 million pounds, which I guess is about $80 to $100 million in size, that as an organisation we're running. My job is really to act as an independent risk advisor to the people who are running those projects, and also to the board of the FCA to give them some assurance that things are going to plan and things won't screw up or screw up the markets or whatever it is that we're regulating for. But a big bit of regulation can sort of last 7 years to implement it. So you can imagine there's a lot happens over that time. And one of the key things that I'm using the wiki for is to capture information about the sort of decisions that people are taking and why they take them, so that when people come along several years later and they're trying to understand why things are being done in a certain way, that information is available to them. Or if they're trying to make a decision at some point, it sort of helps them to understand what factors influence the decisions that have been taken already. I have a small team of people who help me with that. But it's surprising, often they're the only people who've actually stayed with the project throughout its life. And all the other personnel have come and gone. So it's quite a key role in terms of keeping that understanding of what's happening.
You mean the people actually working on the project come and go, and you, the regulators, are the fixtures?
Well, not so much that, but my team. So I have a team of risk advisors who are doing this sort of risk assurance on these projects, and they tend to be fairly constant. But the people who are running the projects and writing the code or doing the consultation, they come and go much more frequently. But part of the idea of the wiki is to provide that sort of corporate memory of what happened, why it happened.
Yeah. So was it your idea to set up a wiki?
Yeah, it was. So I got this team of people, and what happens is, somebody goes on holiday and something happens on one of these projects, and if they haven't sort of documented anything, then nobody knows what's going on. So we thought, we'll have the wiki and use that as a way of documenting stuff, but also we then started using it as a sort of little workflow system, so we can sort of set up tasks within the wiki and attach documents to those tasks, and record what happens from those tasks.
Right.
Possibly you can imagine we attend a lot of meetings, and so frequently somebody will prepare a paper for a meeting for discussion, and then we'll pass some commentary on that. What are the risks that need to be thought about in terms of that decision? Then they'll have the meeting and they'll take a decision, and what we're trying to do is capture that information so people understand that in the future.
Right.
The trouble is, I don't know if you've worked in government at all, but one of the big problems is you're accountable, so people can come along often years later and ask for information, or you might be called before a government committee to explain why you did a certain thing if the outcome hasn't been good, and therefore you need that record of what happened. And a wiki is a great tool for doing that, because it allows you to capture information in lots of different ways. And if you use tools like page forms or cargo or semantic MediaWiki, then it allows you to start giving some meaning to that data and then reporting on it or retrieving it in flexible ways that really make it a lot more useful. Before that, some of these projects, so if you took we recently finished one called MiFID II, Markets in Financial Instruments 2. That lasted 7 years as a project. It produced something like over 10,000 different documents in its lifetime. There were hundreds of consultations with industry and responses, and we needed a way of putting an umbrella over all of that information so people can actually find stuff in it and sort of get to the important stuff without having to necessarily trawl through thousands and thousands of sort of Word documents or Excel documents that are dotted all over a sort of cloud storage cover somewhere. And so we use the wiki as a way of sort of putting an umbrella over all of that lot, so it's a lot easier to find and trace stuff through it.
Yeah. Do you avoid? Is there some kind of regulation or directive to avoid Word and Excel documents and that sort of thing, and put everything in the wiki?
There isn't yet, but that would be my sort of ultimate goal. And it's part of what sort of drove my interest really in things like the TinyMCE, because one of the problems historically, I think, with a wiki is for people who are sort of lawyers or accountants or people like that, policymakers, they're not really very technical. So if they've got to then start using something like wiki markup, it immediately becomes a barrier to them using it. So part of the idea of making TinyMCE available to them was to make it as familiar as possible, just like doing a Word document, and then they could actually put the data directly into the wiki. Then you get a lot of benefits, because particularly things like traceability, one of the problems with Word documents is you get lots of different versions of the same document, and often it will be released several different times, and it's not very easy then to know which version you're looking at or who said what when. One of the attractions of the wiki is you've got a log of all of those changes over time. So certainly the sort of desire is to move to that sort of environment where you can actually put all of that data in the wiki. Whereas at the moment, what it tends to be, we have more of a sort of summary or a digest of the key points in the document in the wiki, and some of the recorded conversations that have gone on around what's in the document are in the wiki, but there's still a lot of stuff sitting in sort of Word documents and Excel documents.
Yeah, okay, I get it. Yeah.
which are just horrendous. And the trouble is, people just don't bother. So there'll be important information about why, say, a bit of software was designed in a particular way. But after a year or two, people just can't be bothered to go out and find out. So then they might start changing things without really understanding why it was done in a particular way in the first place. So that sort of introduces a level of inefficiency into people's processes.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't even imagine the nightmares of dealing with documents where multiple people can make independent changes, and then at that point you've got two or more conflicting versions of the same document.
Yeah. Well, it's a bit like having, say, Git. And having lots of people editing the same bit of software at the same time, and then you have the sort of problem of how do you sort of merge all those different versions as people
Right.
But it's not like that people are being particularly disciplined, particularly in big documents. You'll typically have different people writing different sections. You may have 10 people all working on the same document, particularly a bit of legislation. You might have 50 different people, and some of them will be in different regulators across Europe, all trying to produce stuff and not really knowing exactly what other people are working on at the same time. So then you have this enormous exercise to try and rationalize it all before it then becomes published. And then you'll get a lot of commentary back on what's published, and then you'll have to go back and all 50 people will have to go back and edit their bits. It's very Kafkaesque, sort of.
I guess so, right.
Sorry, but it does explain why, or helps one understand why governments seem to be so bureaucratic and so slow moving, because they have this sort of approach that so many people need to be involved and get things done, which I guess is where a sort of dictatorship comes in. You can just have one guy saying, well, that's the way it's going to be, and just do it. Whereas in a sort of democracy, you have to consult and you have to research the impacts. And
sure, that's very interesting. Yeah,
there's a great phrase. I forget where it came from, but it's a very famous phrase dealing in a sort of policy type environment that there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. So whatever you change, there are going to be winners and losers. And part of the policy development is you've got to work quite hard to understand who those winners and losers are. And I think with sort of big data, we can get better at it, because we can understand, in financial regulation, we have things called financial lives. And that's basically about 10 to 20 groups of a bit like use cases. So they're people who have a different scenario. So they might be people who are out of work, or they might be young professionals, or they might be people with young families, or they might be retired people. And when we introduce new regulations, we have to look at each of those groups and try and gauge what the impact of that regulation would be on those different groups, and then bring that together and say, well, the balance of the trade-offs between those groups, is that a better outcome for society as a whole, or is it actually going to cause more harm than good to the people that we're trying to protect, or to too many people that we're trying to protect? And you can imagine, like, if you look at the current COVID situation, it's exactly that. Do you lock everything down and protect as many people as possible, but then do a lot of damage to people's livelihoods through the impact on the economy, or do you or do you sort of err on the side of letting more people get sick? but try and protect the economy. And it's those sort of calculations then become quite complex. And there's lots of shades of grey, but no sort of simple black and white. Yep, we'll just do that.
Sure. Yeah.
And then part of what we do is try and record all of those conversations. So, in 6 months' time, when somebody calls you before Parliament or calls my boss before Parliament and says, "Why on earth did you do this? It's caused all this damage." You've got a record of how you reach that conclusion.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It all makes sense. And hopefully, we as software developers and users and all that can do as much as we can to help with that goal of coordination and communication and all that. Although as you know, some of these are unsolvable problems. There's no ideal solution.
No, I think a lot of it is because it's all about decision making. It's really how do you make sure the people taking the decision have the best information available to them at the time they make it. So, and I think that's where the sort of software of all different sorts can help, because it can bring together the right information at the right place in the right time. So that those people who've got to make those very tricky decisions actually are as well informed as they can be.
Yeah.
Because the alternative is to just take a guess, and we all know that a lot of the time, if you take a guess, you're not going to get an optimal answer.
Sure. Yeah. And just briefly, that's very interesting what you said about the too much bureaucracy and slow moving can lead to the tyranny. It reminded me that there was a famous book called The Road to Serfdom that sort of described that situation by a guy named Friedrich Hayek, who was mentioned on this podcast before because he was actually an influence on Jimmy Wales when he first
oh really? Yeah.
Was developing Wikipedia. Yeah, not that book. I don't think that book specifically, but it's still interesting that there's an interesting tie-in there.
Yeah.
Well, that's all very interesting. One other thing I was going to mention, actually, speaking of Word documents, there's something 2 episodes ago, the episode with Evita Hollis, she said she runs the wiki at General Electric. They have something I haven't heard from happening anywhere else, which is that she has a team of people who help with the wiki, and one of their jobs is actually doing Word to wiki conversion, so people can email them a Word document and they will put it on the wiki. The basic idea is, it pays off for itself to put in that work. In terms of future convenience.
So it's quite interesting. I mean, one of the things that is on the wish list for the TinyMCE extension is to look again at cutting and pasting from Word documents, because TinyMCE has in its paste plugin has a sort of simple filter that filters out a lot of the unnecessary HTML that is in an HTML Word document.
Right.
Will then sort of paste it into a TinyMCE editor window, which then obviously in the extension will get converted into wiki markup. So now I haven't looked at that again because I'm in the process of upgrading to TinyMCE 5, which has been out for a year or so. But one of my goals, given this problem, is to be able to process the Word documents through the TinyMCE editor, whether sort of manually or better automatically, and just bring them in that way. So that might be something that some of your other listeners might be interested in.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We'll get to the TinyMCE stuff. And it really is sort of part of everything you do, obviously. But um, I want to ask. So, how much of your job is wiki related at this point?
Probably, apart from using it as a user, probably none of the job is. I mean, I set up the wiki probably about 18 months ago for the FCA. And then I went on a sabbatical for about 9 months, which I've just finished. And I said to them before that, just give me a call if anything happens that you need me to work on the wiki to fix anything or to. And it's been working fine without any intervention for that entire period.
Oh, that's great.
So I think that's, again, one of the joys of the wiki is once it's operating, it does seem to be very robust. You know, I use quite a few tools on it, but once they're set up and working, they just seem to carry on working. I better touch wood at this stage because I'll probably get a call in 5 minutes to say it's gone horribly wrong.
Well, what about just changes to the data structure and that kind of thing? Or they haven't needed that?
No. So not in that period. I think the next stage will be when I do bring out the next version of the plug of the extension. Then, some of these features like bringing in Word documents will be something I'll be introducing for them. But no, most of what I'm doing at the moment on the wiki is actually more as like my hobby, if you like, or my sort of personal endeavor on the side, which is getting this new version up and running.
Yeah.
Once that's done, I don't know, I think I talked to you before about I have a relationship with a couple of software firms who do project management software. One of the things I'll do when I've got this version out is to look again at developing some plugins for their software, which is around content management for their clients. So that's sort of if you like, something I've got in mind for a retirement project, or when I retire from the FCA, which I probably will do in the next year, is to do a bit of that as a means of keeping myself occupied.
Yeah.
Keeping my brain working, hopefully.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's one of the benefits, one of the many benefits of being in software, being a software developer is, you can always do something. Your skills are always helpful.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, you probably do software and have done all your life, but it's a good way of exercising the brain, I think.
Absolutely.
To work on software, because you have to remember what's happening, particularly a big piece of software. It's a very good way of training your mind to be active and keep the memory, which unfortunately, as you get older, it's something that becomes more of a problem. I don't know, some of your listeners may be more advanced years will probably know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's always true in software. That's true at any age, I think. I mean, I found myself looking at software that I wrote 6 months ago and having absolutely no recollection of either writing it or what it does.
Yeah. I know that feeling very well.
Yeah. So this work you want to do in retirement it's not wiki related, I assume. It's not MediaWiki.
Yeah, no, it will be. So it's
really? Okay.
Really taking more or less the concept of what I've done for the FCA, but turning it into more of a tool for people who are running projects. So it becomes, you see, part of running projects, they produce a lot of documents, but very often those documents have a common structure and they're interrelated. So something that manages that through using a wiki and forms and data behind those forms is a sort of key problem for a lot of projects, and a lot of projects are still stuck in the days of using lots of tools like PowerPoint and Word and stuff like that, and lots of programming tools, but these things aren't necessarily very well integrated across the piece. So the more that could be integrated. Now, on the programming side, you've got integrated development environments, and on the project management side, you've got some integrated project management tools. But the sort of side of the more sort of text and the spreadsheets and stuff like that, there's still a lot of them using unintegrated tools, and I know Microsoft is trying to integrate them, but it never seems to be very seamless. So it's really that component of project management that I'm quite interested in, and that's really why I got into the wikis in the first place, was dealing with that sort of problem of how do you manage all of this unstructured data that projects produce.
Yeah. So this would be one or more new extensions that you are thinking of creating?
Yeah. Although it is quite interesting because you probably find this a lot of the sort of software in inverted commas that I've produced for the FCA, it really sits in libraries of templates.
Sure.
So I use tools like Cargo and Page Forms and the TinyMCE, but then I wrap those in sort of templates that control sort of workflow and sort of produce reports and produce dashboards. So I guess a key sort of challenge for me, and I'm sure it's the same for other people, is how do you manage that sort of library of templates and package those up? So I haven't yet really come across an extension that does that. It may be, I'm sure somebody's sort of thought of it already and probably has a great tool for managing those sort of libraries of templates and things. But as yet, I haven't sort of come across one.
Yeah. It's extremely interesting that you say that, because I'm actually working on such a thing right now.
Brilliant.
I wasn't gonna. This is, I guess, the public first public mention of it. Yeah, I'll talk to you afterwards. But that's very interesting. You say that. It's good to hear. Yeah, I think it's gonna be cool if and when I or someone else releases such a thing. No, nothing really exists for that at the moment. No.
No, and then I think you can almost start sort of packaging up sort of wiki software, so it becomes wiki applications, if you like, rather than sort of tools that people use to produce their applications.
Yeah, absolutely, and hopefully it gets around that blank page problem. When people first install MediaWiki, you've installed all the software. Now what? You know.
Yeah.
One other thing about that I want to ask about your current wiki setup. There's we just had our online EMW con a few weeks ago. One of the questions that came up pretty regularly during the Q&A sessions is whether this virus and the fact that everyone is now working remotely have had any impact on the usage of internal wikis, like whether wikis are more useful when you can't see each other face to face, that kind of thing. Have you noticed that at all, or is it pretty much the same level of usage?
I'm starting to, as I say, I was off for 9 months. So I've only been back a couple of weeks, but in that time already, I've had one sort of group chat with a team of people where they were getting quite angry with each other because one of the members hadn't been recording any of his meetings and stuff on the wiki. The other people were saying, well, when we're all in the office, we could just lean over and ask you. But now, we need to find something out from you, and you're in a conference call or you're off walking the dog. We could have gone to the wiki and just got that, and that's what the rest of us are doing. So why don't you start? Fortunately, now that person is rather chastened, and I noticed he started updating the wiki pages. I mean, I was quite lucky because the team of people I've got who are using it are quite disciplined, apart from this one chap, about using it. But they are saying it is much. It's even more useful now, because there are lots of times where you could just lean over and ask somebody a question, but now it's really coming into its own, where they can go to the wiki and very often get an answer straight away without having to track somebody down or interrupt somebody. So yes, I think I am seeing that even in the brief period that we're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. That's very interesting.
Are you seeing that from other people? Was that the feedback you were getting?
Mostly people said it had no impact. There was one person, I can't remember who said that indeed usage seemed to have gone up in the previous few weeks. Of course. At this point, that was only for most people just a week or two into the full quasi lockdown that we're in now. So maybe people will have more of a sense at this point.
Yes.
So by the way, you had an interesting timing for your vacation. I don't know if it was good timing or bad timing. Probably good timing.
So it has been quite interesting, but I was in two minds whether to go back at all, but they persuaded me partly because of this thing with the virus. They've had quite a few people off, and also it's introduced a lot of risks. So both in the sort of projects they were working on, but of course there's a huge impact on financial companies and on financial users. So it's been quite interesting just to observe since I got back how people have suddenly had to sort of swing into a sort of totally different mode of operation to deal with the issues that are coming up. So, for instance, they introduced a huge loan scheme for companies to participate in who were losing trade, and they did that through the banks, of course. But a lot of people are struggling to take it up because of various regulations that banks have to observe when they're making a loan, because of the risk associated with different companies taking up the loan. So then we had to rush out some changes to the regulation in a very short period to say, well, actually, you don't now have to apply all those checks and balances. And we also had to persuade the government to underwrite a lot of those loans, because obviously you can't say to the banks, well, you're going to have to make a lot of dodgy high-risk loans and then say if they all go bad, we're not going to stand behind them, because then the banks themselves start going bust, and then you've got a whole host of problems associated with people's banks going bust. So it's very interesting to see this sudden sort of change in the way things are done and the gearing up of the activity. But I allowed them to persuade me to go back for a few months to sort of help them through this period, and then maybe I'll go back to my sort of semi-retirement again after that.
Yeah, okay.
So it was a sort of trial retirement.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Gosh, yeah. That's
I
very.
can spend much more time working on my extensions and my wikis when I'm retired.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking of extensions, let's talk about TinyMCE. So TinyMCE is the name of the extension but it's also the name of the JavaScript library that the extension is mostly based around. And it's a pretty popular library for those who don't know about it. So can you explain what it is, that the TinyMCE JavaScript library?
So it's really a WYSIWYG, or what you see, what you get editor. And for anybody who's used a tool like Word, it's or sort of Outlook and email, it's very similar to the document editor interface you get for that. But it's also a very flexible tool, so it's used by many other providers. So I think in WordPress and Joomla, it is the sort of editor interface that those tools use as well, to provide that sort of interface between the user and creating documents within the software. So that's what it does, and it does all the things like formatting and headers and footers and tables and lists and all of that stuff. But it's also very configurable, so which is why I've been able to create a plugin that will translate basically from wiki markup text into HTML that the editor works on, and then translate it back again when it's saved to the wiki page. So that's right. Broadly what it does. I mean, the motivation behind it is I have another wiki which I developed for a sailing club, a model yacht sailing club, which is the membership is all people who are sort of gentlemen who are 80 plus years old, and they needed a way, because it was a wiki, to edit pages to put them onto their website, and that was the first time application I used for this. But it is a way of allowing people, pretty much like VisualEditor as well, and perhaps we'll talk in a minute why I developed this as well, but it's a way of providing a much more user-friendly interface for people who aren't technical to edit the wiki and put information into the wiki, and also potentially to structure that information, if you combine it with something like page forms.
Yeah, definitely. Right. Let's see, what was I going to say? Yeah. I remember when I first heard from you, which was maybe 2.5 years ago, something like that. You were only talking about that model boat wiki, so I had no idea about your real job. I just thought you were just a model boat enthusiast.
Yeah, well, it probably was at that time, but
yeah, okay.
but if you like, that was the sort of pilot site, so I could get to learn to use all of these tools before I sort of tried to land it on my colleagues at work, because I'm not really at my work, I'm nothing really to do with the IT department. So if I just pitched up and said, I'm going to start writing software, can you start implementing it on your servers? They would have looked at me like I was nuts. But
right.
Because I was able to show them something that used the tools that I was talking about. And in fact, it was quite fortuitous, because at the time they were just moving all of our systems into the cloud. And they also were thinking about using a wiki as a tool for sort of recording all the information that they were generating. So in fact, they sort of ended up using some of the stuff that I created for their own sort of environments and tools. And in fact, they, rather than sort of treating me like some weird person who's sort of come out of their user department wanting to write software, they sort of said, actually, it was really great getting to know me, and I've been really helpful to them. So, which took me back a bit.
Cool. Yeah. So, are people using how are people using TinyMCE at the model boat club and at your job?
Yeah,
I mean,
basically both. They use it through page forms. So at the Model Boat Club, they basically, there's a few types of page they produce. There's a sort of newsletter type page, which is what they call their landing stage, which is just sort of articles where they have a title and then a short description and then more data, and then on the front page of that they just have a list of articles that are in date order. I'm sure you know the sort of thing, but they also have a calendar. So behind each of those calendars there's a page for each of the events, which is a very similar structure, but it obviously is associated with a date and a time and a location. So it comes up in a calendar view. And then the third type of page is they have race meetings. And obviously those are like calendar events to start with, but they then input the results of their race meetings. So where everybody came and the scores they got, and then at the end of the series of races, they can work out who the winner was and who was second. And they started using the data in quite an interesting way as well, so they can see which boats won most races. So when somebody sells their boat, if it's been a good boat, other people will pay more money for it. So it's been quite interesting. They started using it in ways that I hadn't envisaged to start with. But it's basically to allow them to put in this fairly simple data, but using an interface where they're putting in the text that is familiar to them from their sort of their email programs and things like that.
Yeah.
So, and similarly at work, it's just very similar sort of setup. They're recording information that's sort of semi-structured, but it's to allow them to use an interface that's familiar to input the data with.
Sure. Yeah. So as you mentioned before, there is a standard extension, a WYSIWYG extension called VisualEditor. Why did you decide to go with TinyMCE and not VisualEditor?
Yeah. So at the time I started, VisualEditor was still very much on the drawing board. But I did find, as I tried to use the earlier versions, it was quite difficult to get it working. And also because of the way the sort of website works at the sailing club and also at my office, it's quite difficult to go in and actually sort of use the console to sort of set up the software and to get them set it up. So it's just a much easier way of getting things up and running. And as soon as we sort of released the extension, I heard from a lot of other people who are in a similar situation where they don't really have access to the environment beyond being able to get extensions installed to sort of set up the sort of slightly more complicated environment you get with VisualEditor. I think another thing a couple of people have said is that perhaps it's a slightly more familiar interface for VisualEditor and that their users are more comfortable with that. So as long as people find a use for it, then I'm sort of happy to sort of maintain it, and also allows me to start perhaps using some of the other facilities that TinyMCE has to offer, which maybe VisualEditor there won't be the incentive for them to do.
Oh, that's interesting. What's an example of that?
So there are things that. So I'm doing a bit of work at the moment with Wikibase, who you're probably familiar with, who are a company in the Netherlands who have created.
Oh, that Wikibase, yes, sure. Their head, Ad Strak van Schijndel. I interviewed him just a few months ago.
Yes, that's right. That Wikibase. So they're doing various things with forms within, using forms within actually the TinyMCE environment, sort of tools within that.
Okay.
So I think they're using something called WS Forms now, and they're using the Bootstrap environment as well. So I've only just started looking at that with them, but there are sort of tools and things like this this plugin that allows you to sort of bring in Word documents and put them into the wiki. Those sorts of things are quite interesting. And also, I think, if you get something like a template library, it would be very nice to sort of then link that in, so you can actually bring in the templates through the TinyMCE editor. I think they probably got something similar within VisualEditor as well, so you can actually start using those templates without having to really sort of understand how to make a template call within wiki markup, just to go and select something to say bring up a table and embed it into your wiki page, or to bring up a bit of data and embed it into your wiki page, but to do that through the editor interface, rather than having to come out and sort of put it into the page, or to go into the sort of wiki markup editor to do that.
Sure, absolutely. So the TinyMCE extension actually began its life as an extension, confusingly enough, called VisualEditor.
Yes.
Which is not related to the more well-known VisualEditor. It's an extension that was created by the BlueSpice people, or rather the Hollow Velt people, who create the BlueSpice package. And I think it was... I don't even know if they were using it when you started modifying it, if it was abandoned.
I think they
remember?
Recently abandoned it. So I think when I started, before we sort of got in touch with them, so in the very early days, they were probably still using it. But at the time when it became clear that it was going to be a feasible extension to sort of release, then I think by then they'd stopped using it and gone to using VisualEditor in their environment. But I think they were quite pleased that somebody was going to pick it up and sort of maintain it, because clearly they'd spent a lot of time getting it to work in the first place.
Yeah.
I guess it's always nice to know that your work doesn't sort of go to waste.
Yeah, that's true. And well, they have a certain approach to releasing software, which is to not really release it, or to quasi-release it. So you definitely opened up the software to a lot more people, I think, just by putting it in the Wikimedia repository and cleaning it up and all that. And of course, I guess the big change technically, well, I don't know what technical changes you made to it other than getting it to work in forms. I was going to say that's the big change.
Yes. So initially that was a big sort of goal, really, was to get that to happen. But I think probably as you found and I did when I was using it, it was really designed not to be a sort of 100% sort of coverage of wiki markup. So,
right.
And I think if you use it as your sole interface, then that doesn't really matter. But once you start using it to edit pages that people have created through wiki markup, then you start finding there are a lot of circumstances that it doesn't really cover, or it only partially covers. So there's been quite a lot of work since the first release just to get it to have much greater coverage. Now, I think the current master release available through the through Gerrit and GitHub is probably about 70% of, it covers probably 90% of people's needs. But the new version I've been working on, which also goes to TinyMCE version 5, I think is a much greater coverage, and I've been using the sort of standard help pages from the wiki markup in Wikimedia
To test
to
it.
use as a test. And it's incredible how many special cases there are. But I think there's much better coverage now, and also the software is a lot more robust, because I went back once I had a better understanding of all these exceptions. I've gone back and rewritten quite large chunks of it to make it a lot easier to maintain, because I think, as you'll recall, because it had evolved over many years, some bits of it the code were quite difficult to understand.
Definitely.
And therefore it was not as robust in some areas as perhaps it should have been. But I think we're a lot better now in terms of maintainability and robustness, which is to take nothing away from the original authors. They had to crack the more difficult parts of the problem.
They did a good job all in all. It's coming back to me now, all the issues with lines that start with 2 colons and an asterisk or that kind of thing, and
and sort of because it's a WYSIWYG editor, when you view it in TinyMCE, it's meant to look as near as to what you'd see on the rendered page as possible. Now, the thing with MediaWiki is, in odd places it decides not to render lines or to render extra lines and stuff like that. So understanding that now in MediaWiki, that's fine, because it's not trying to translate them back to wiki text. But obviously, if you've got to go in both directions, it becomes quite complex to understand, A, what the rule is, and B, then exercise it in all the different situations it might arise.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to cough now. So have some water to stop me coughing.
Oh, very good. Yeah. Yeah. No one should be alarmed if they hear you coughing.
Yeah. So yeah, especially in this day and age. So, but yeah, all the sorts of different situations where you might have a list followed by a table, or a table followed by something else, heading, and all of those. There are all sorts of strange little quirks about whether a sort of empty line gets rendered as an empty line, or whether you need 2 lines, or whether 2 lines renders as 3. But I've now got sort of a number of different test pages which hopefully test the vast majority of any possible combination. Although I'm sure as soon as I release it, somebody will find exceptions that I haven't come across.
Yeah, it never really ends.
No, because this is a bit of a hobby, it would be a shame if it ever came to an end.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah. That's a positive way of looking at it.
I think of this like the game Doom. I don't know if you know the game Doom.
You sure?
But years ago, I used to work in Hong Kong and spend a lot of time on planes and played Doom. And trying to fix a bit of code is very much like playing Doom. You come across one bug and you trace it down and you slay it, and immediately that's working. Another 3 bugs suddenly appear from somewhere. So you have to go and get some weapons and go and find those. I remember I used to play it in the sort of early 90s. And I actually got to the end of it because it wasn't too difficult in those days. But I view this extension very much like playing Doom, and sitting down for another few hours to find another bug somewhere and sort it out.
There's always more monsters around the corner.
And the biggest monster for me is to then try and upload it on Gerrit and get it put in.
Okay, well, that's the biggest challenge then.
Yeah, it usually takes me at least a day for every patch to work out how to get Gerrit working again and to upload it.
Yeah.
You probably noticed I often don't quite get it right. And then I have to call on you to come.
Okay, yeah. No,
I
think you've gotten. I think it's gotten more standardized recently. I don't know.
Yeah.
I was gonna say. For me as a programmer, it can be it's rewarding to fix bugs and get things working, but it has to be just the right amount of bugs. If it's too many, then it can become really demoralizing.
Yeah. That's the good thing about starting with somebody else's code that's not too bad,
right?
Because it does something and it works. And although I can break it, if I break it really badly, I can just reverse out the last set of changes and put them back in one by one and work out what's going. So I think it wasn't intentional, but by picking up the TinyMCE extension as something that was working, certainly got me over that period of the demoralization of not actually being able to get anything to work at all.
Yeah, I can't imagine starting a WYSIWYG project from scratch. I mean, even the Wikimedia Foundation people with VisualEditor and Parsoid, that's getting to be almost a 10-year project at this point.
Yeah. I did actually do when I was a programmer. I used to work on PDP 11s. I don't know if you even heard of those.
It sounds familiar.
It used to be a mini computer before.
Oh yeah, right.
Before PCs were invented, that was the sort of smallest computer you get. We used an editor, a sort of line editor called Tico in those days, which was almost like a cult thing amongst people who programmed. And I remember working on that. They produced what was the equivalent of a WYSIWYG editor for the sort of terminals you got in those days, called VTEdit. And I remember working on that, but again, it wasn't from scratch. But it was certainly quite challenging, because they used to call Tico a sort of I forget what they called it, a write once editor. You could write something in the editor to edit something, but to actually remember what it said was virtually impossible afterwards. So it was a write once editor, which was an interesting concept, I think.
Yeah.
It was interesting. You could write your name in Tico and it would do something. It would be a program, because each of the commands in Tico was a single letter. So you'd write your
okay,
name,
now I get it. Yeah,
and then
yeah.
you'd just escape it at the end, and it'd go off and execute whatever string you'd typed in. So
that's very efficient, I guess.
Yeah. It appeals to a certain sort of person who likes. It's a bit like decoding code in the sense of cryptic codes. Trying to understand what it means when you see a bit of cryptic code.
Yeah. I'm glad I never really had to deal with all that.
Well, I did train as a mathematician, so
okay.
Having spent a lot of time doing algebra, that sort of thing was sort of second nature, really.
A big jumble of letters. Yeah,
which was meaningless to letters and symbols that are meaningless to anybody else.
Yeah. So I want to ask, actually, what was the response from the BlueSpice / HoloVelt people to your taking up or taking over their extension?
As I was sort of saying before, I think they were really pleased. I think they'd spent a lot of time on it, but I think they were really pleased that somebody was going to keep it going. But I think they were also very pleased that something they'd spent a lot of time on was going to get a sort of wider audience.
Yeah. Okay.
So they were really pleased. I haven't really heard from them since, so I'm not sure if they've sort of check back in, see what it does, or whether it's changed much. But I'll probably drop them a line when I release the new version and say, take a look, see what it does. But there is a sort of reasonably small but growing population of people who do seem to be using it quite a lot. So I think for any programmer, it's probably quite pleasing to know that something you've produced is still getting used.
Yeah, definitely. You're talking about them or yourself, or both? I guess.
Well, I think both. Yeah. I think we were talking before we actually came on air about COBOL programmers and how they're sort of coming out of the woodwork to.
That was recorded. That was recorded, I believe.
Oh, right. Okay. So, and I think I was saying that in the year 2000 that happened a lot, and they were delighted that their code was still being used.
Yeah.
It was interesting that old code never actually dies. It just gets wrapped up in something else.
Sure. Yes. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I remember hearing when I was in college that the most popular programming language in terms of number of lines that existed was COBOL, I believe. I think it's JavaScript at this point, but for a very long time it was software written in the 60s.
Yes, yeah, that's right. I mean, wouldn't surprise me if it's JavaScript now. I think I've generated quite a few thousand lines.
You're doing your part
to add to the sort of mountain of JavaScript.
It's weird. People think of MediaWiki as a PHP application, which it is, but it is just there's a ton of JavaScript throughout everything and extensions as well.
Yeah.
For better or worse. Well, I mean, it's good, but it's not the easiest language to deal with.
Yeah, no, and sort of, I found, I probably stopped programming in 1985 in any sort of commercial or serious sense, apart from macros and Excel and stuff like that. So it was quite interesting coming back to it and sort of seeing how people program now compared to how they used to program in those days. I suppose the sort of object-orientated thing has had quite a big impact on that.
Oh, yeah.
But, it's quite interesting, even looking at the latest version of TinyMCE, where they've gone the sort of whole hog of everything's just objects that are declared. It's sort of quite strange to somebody who's brought up in a sort of more procedural programming language. And also the sort of idea that you're sort of talking to something remote, quite often asynchronously, is a sort of big change, perhaps, from the days when I used to sort of program where everything was in the same environment. And most of the terminals were sort of pretty dumb terminals.
Yeah, well, that took me effort to adjust to, and I still haven't fully adjusted to the whole concept of doing things asynchronously. Yeah, absolutely. That's a big challenge, is getting into that mind frame of, you can't just say do A and then B and then C. You have to put things in different locations and say once A is done, it has to call B and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, yeah, no, that's right. So I must admit, I cheat a bit in Apache and still use the asynchronous false setting. But
okay.
But I'm gradually getting to grips with it.
coming to terms with it.
Yes.
Cool. We covered a lot. I think that's all of my questions. Is there anything we missed? Anything you want to talk about?
No. I think, as always, Yaron, it's been a great pleasure talking to you. I'm sure we could carry on chatting for hours and hours, but your audience would probably get quite bored with that. No, it's been a good chat, and as always, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, but also for all your help as well. Been a great mentor to me over the years.
Well, that's really flattering. That's very nice to hear. I'm always glad I can help out. The TinyMCE extension, as you noted, has been helpful to a lot of people. And Duncan, it was great talking to you. I hope you stay healthy and keep doing helpful. Oh my God! Now's the part where I trip up.
And you too. Keep safe and look after yourself. And hopefully, we'll be meeting up again soon in some conference. When all of this nonsense passes.
Yeah, I hope so. All right.
Okay. Then.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye for now.
Bye. And this has been another episode of Between the Brackets. I want to again thank my guest, Duncan Crane of the UK's Financial Conduct Authority, for coming on the show. Thanks to all of you for listening. Stay healthy, stay productive, and I'll see you next time.